Welcome to the Relational Recovery podcast. I'm your host, Wes Thompson, joined by my co-host, Austin Hill. Today, we talk about the reality that we all have to do our own work if we want to change to become the people that we want to be. We talk around what that means and how we might start. So we hope this conversation is helpful, and thanks for listening. Good morning, Austin.
Morning, Wes. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing good. The trains were out today, so I'm running behind.
Well, hopefully we'll get on track. Today I want to talk about, essentially there's the need for us to do our own work when it comes to our own development. And I think sometimes that's hard because effort's hard and we don't want to do the work. And we work at the Refuge, and one thing I've heard and noticed recently is we've really started to invest more energy and focus in addressing mental health. And we've been able to hire more staff. And what that's done is it's changed some things, but it's changed some things, I think, in a better way. And the guys in our ministry are getting more one-on-one sessions as well as group sessions. And in those sessions, they're being asked to do assignments and work. And for some, that has been frustrating, or they don't want to do it. But like to remind all of us, right? The Refuge, we're an inpatient 24/7 rehab for substance use disorder or addiction, some people might call it. So there's this need. There's anyone here, obviously there's a need for doing life a bit different than what we currently are. And I think it's probably worth noticing right off the bat that to do life different than what we currently are takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of intentionality. Human beings, we like routines, even if we don't notice them. We're very habitual. We're habit-making people, and so to live life in a different way can be hard. And I think today I just wanted to bring that it's more of bringing this idea to our awareness, saying something that everybody knows, but it's good to just be reminded of and be like, man, sometimes I just have to suck it up. I just have to embrace it. But it's this idea that in order to grow, we have to do our own work. We have to do our own work. And I thought this was relevant, some of the things I just mentioned about our context at the Refuge, but also anybody else just being reminded that yes, I've met with a counselor a lot. Yes, I currently meet people that coach me but those people don't fix me, right? They definitely have helped in incredible ways, but I still have to do my own work. A lot of times from those kinds of meetings, I leave with some sort of productive action, not some sort of a productive action, which is the language that I use, but an action step, something that I have to do, because people can guide and help and definitely support and push, but they can't heal us or fix us. I believe in my worldview that comes from God spiritually in our soul and sometimes physically, but that comes from also ourselves. And it also does come from others, but I think sometimes we have maybe too high expectations for that. And frankly, something that you and I talk about a lot, Austin, is we can't control others. So if I'm expecting to get something from someone else in order for me to become what I need to become, that's a problem, because I need to first do what I need to do. I need to take responsibility for myself. And so, again, I just said a lot of words. In summary, the short conversation I want to have today is around this idea that we all have to do our own work if we're going to become something other than what we are. Somebody else can't do it for us. We've got to think about our story. We've got to think about our triggers. We've got to think about our behaviors. We got to think about maybe there's trauma. We got to think about what we've gone through. And we've got to take intentional effort to show up to the best we can wherever we are and engage and do the work. Definitely great to have people around us. That's necessary. Community is necessary. Counselors, coaches, therapists, whatever you want to call it, helpful, incredibly helpful. Church community, incredibly helpful. Family, incredibly helpful. But at the end of the day, right, I've got to show up as well. I can't blame them for me. And there's certain kinds of work that they can't do that I have to do. So I'll just kind of that be a jumping off point. So yeah, thoughts.
It's identifying like what are we truly responsible for within relationships, because we don't walk around life just like by ourselves. And what I'm hearing you talk about is identifying that I need to be responsible for myself and my growth. Now, that doesn't mean that it's all on me. It means that when I ask for help or I get other inputs, I take those in and I process them. Because if we're constantly taking feedback from our peers, from coaches and counselors, and I have no influence on what they say, it's like I'm just going to do whatever they say. That's not self-responsibility. That's putting all the expectations of my improvement on someone else. So that's, I think what I'm hearing you talk about is, if we want a different life, there are parts of our choices that are about who we surround ourselves with and who we get input from. But the biggest thing that we're responsible for is ourselves and the choices we make and how we want to improve our lives. Like, the benefit of living in community is hearing different perspectives, because everybody struggles with this. Anybody who says they don't is just lying. Like, everyone struggles with self-worth, valuing themselves, loving themselves well, accepting love. And you can't convince yourself in a vacuum that you're lovable or a loved person, because you have to be around other people to experience being loved. Like, that's how we learn to experience it differently, because it's time, again and again and again, seeing someone be kind to you, someone sacrificing of their time for you, seeing how people invest and give you feedback that might be hard to hear, but is better for your future. So we do need other people, but what I'm hearing you say is like, what do we do with that information? What do we do when someone who cares deeply about us, who wants the best for us, says something and gives input, and you're like, I want to change this, and someone says, well, these are some examples on what you can do, or I'm seeing this, you should really think about looking into why you're doing that unhealthy behavior and understand, like, well, what do I do with that? And I'm hearing that moment is what we're talking about, is once we realize, like, I want to be a different person or move in a different direction, what do I do about it? That's on you. It's not the other person who didn't tell you to do something and then you just do exactly what they say. It's, what are the choices I'm going to make to create the life that I want?
Yeah. I think it's just, you're right. Like, what am I doing to create the life that I want? I've got to show up. Like, it's definitely good to be helped by others, but I've got to show up. I think what pops in my head in this moment is, I think a lot of us, like, we live our lives like we're playing the lottery. It's like, I've never been a lottery player, but it's like, I remember being in high school, and one of my close friends, who unfortunately we've lost touch, and he's not doing great. But I remember he was asked one time by an older adult that we both respected. He's like, what do you want to do with your life? And he's like, oh, I'm just going to win the lottery. And essentially what he was saying was like he didn't have a plan. He didn't have any goals. He didn't have any sort of strategy or perspective or whatever for his life. And that didn't end well for him. And I think we live our lives that way sometimes, you know. I'll just use the refuge, for example. I think some guys, I mean, going into a rehab, that's definitely a step. Good for you. But it's like sometimes we latch on to a program or to a person and we think, well, I'll just do whatever they say. And it's like I'm playing the lottery. Well, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to do what they say and we'll see what happens. Hopefully that ticket cashes in. And it's like, instead of me thinking and being proactive and doing the work and doing, going after it as hard as I can, I think for some people it's futility, you know, it's just a lack of, I'm never going to be anything other than what I currently am. I think for some people, it's even further than humility. There's just no hope. They've been so beat up that they just can't see outside of the dark hole. I think for some people it's laziness. Like, I just want to put in as least effort as possible. And there's more reasons, I'm sure. But I'm working from the perspective that I think most people can do things that will improve their situation. Like, I don't want us to live in the space of being victims in this moment, because I do think that most people people have gone through really hard and painful things. I do not want to minimize that. At the same time, I want to recognize that I think almost all of us can do things to improve our current situation. Almost all of us can do things to improve our current situation. And I think we need not live our lives like my friend who just said, you know, I'm just going to win the lottery, and essentially say, I'm not going to do much for myself. I'm going to show up and try to buy this ticket, and hopefully that ticket results in, you know, in my way out of my situation. You know, I'm just gambling on my life. It's like, no, what if you took those slow, steady steps towards developing yourself and growing yourself and becoming something better? And that's definitely harder. It's more work, but it's a journey that's worth living, because it results in friendship, it results in skills, it results in confidence, it results in self-worth, it results in you know, meeting people you never would have otherwise met, learning things you would have never otherwise learned, be able to make sense of your story, make sense of your pain, make sense of the unfortunate things that may have happened to you. There's a way forward that may not fix everything, but that can result in something better than where you are. And that takes intentional effort. Everybody has to do their own work. That kind of reality does not happen by osmosis. It doesn't happen by living your life like you're playing the lottery.
Yeah, and that work looks a lot like planning something and putting in expectations for ourselves, and writing down and thinking about a hopeful future. And that's good. But I think some of the fears that people have with that is like, you're going to fail, which is true. And that's part of life. Failure is part of life. And what the benefit of doing your own work isn't about failing less. It's about failing differently, and understanding what that is and not being afraid of it, and realizing that I can learn from these things. Like, that's how that is one of the ways success isn't a guarantee in the future. Failure is. Like, that's real. But the other thing is, like, it doesn't mean that we fail more than we succeed. It means that the type of success that we do end up with, because we all do succeed at something. We all are successful at something, but it's helpful to have a plan and work on ourselves and understand what went well, what didn't. How can I improve on what didn't go well? How can I repeat what did go well? But we will, if someone's like, man, how did that really good thing happen to me? Well, think about it. That requires the work that you're talking about. In the same way, if something went poorly, it's like, what happened? Like, what led to this? What are some things that I can be aware of in myself and in others to just keep an eye on, to know how to respond in a healthier way next time? Because it's like situations repeat themselves. We have tendencies, we have patterns, like you talked about at the beginning, Wes. Like, we are habitual people. So we have habits in our thought processes and how we respond to conflict and challenges and adversity. And being aware of those helps us succeed more often in the future in better ways. Like, it's one thing to be like here, I'll just use, this is an exaggerated example. If I really want to be an astronaut, and that's my plan, my hope for my future, I know that me personally, I'm going to fail at that again and again and again. But if I don't take stock of doing that self-reflection, realizing what, math was not my strong suit in high school. So I know that's you have to be really mathematically smart to be an astronaut. It's not just about being physically healthy. And so maybe I'm attempting something that's not in my skill sets. But I wouldn't know that because I can tell myself I'm good about something. But then other people around me who care about me is like, Austin, you're really good at this. Why don't you focus on this instead of the thing that you're not good at? That doesn't mean you're a bad person, but just these are things that you're better at.
Yeah, we have to be realistic.
Yeah, and so that's choosing to focus on something that there's a higher level of success. Whereas if I just lived in a vacuum, it's I'm going to do this without taking any feedback, without doing any self-reflection on what went on. Of course it's going to feel like I'm going to fail more often because I'm not being realistic. I'm not doing any of the work on myself to realize what is actually going on. And the same. So I use the astronaut one as an example to exaggerate it. So to flip it to a more realistic one, if I'm finding that I'm wanting to use or that I fall back into addiction again and again and again, but I just want to ignore why that happened. I don't want to think about that failure. I don't want to think about that lapse of judgment. How are you going to learn in the future? How are you going to figure out what is it that led me down that path? We hear it's people, places, and things. So who are those people? What are the commonalities in there? Where are the places that I'm going that lead me to this? Being aware of that is really helpful. That's the work we're talking about. It's am I setting myself up for a higher likelihood of success, or am I setting myself up for a higher likelihood of failure?
Yeah, that's good. I think it's interesting when I thought about being more realistic. I think for some people listening, they probably think me changing is unrealistic. And I think that's where that futility comes in for some people. I think that's how people often in recovery, because you're doing essentially addiction manifests itself as I keep doing this thing that I say I don't want to do. And I think over time, when people start to try to change and inevitably relapse, they think, maybe I can't do this. And so on the one hand, yes, let's be realistic. If you want to be an astronaut, that might be we do have to have realistic goals, but the idea that you can change or you can do something different or you can alter your behavior, I would argue is realistic. It's hard. Don't get me wrong. It's very hard, but man, it's rewarding and it's so worth it. And so I wouldn't want anyone, I think it's really important to recognize that in our pursuit of growth, we need to be realistic. But at the same time, I wouldn't want anybody to take away from that their own transformation isn't realistic either. So that was just something that came to mind for me. I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think if someone's wondering, like, is this type of work, is working on myself, these type of introspective or looking at the past or planning for my future, is it even worth it? Like talking about the futility. Um, there are like there is not a time for me personally where I've regretted sitting down and like writing out what's going on in my head. Like sometimes it seems kind of like it's like I've done this, I'm rehashing something again, but more often than not, that type of work isn't. You don't see like a lightning bolt change where you're just like a huge change of trajectory. It's small and over time, but it makes a big difference in the long haul. Like I think it's also fair in it's fair to acknowledge that the time, the short amount of time that guys are working on themselves within the refuge is a blip in the long story of their life. And this we can choose to use these blips in our lives when we're in a certain season to either just loathe everything about it or constantly be asking, like, what am I learning from this to help me in the future, to help me be the husband I want to be, the father I want to be, the son I want to be, the employer, the employee I want to be. Because we can choose. We're like the idea that like, oh, I just can't change is, I don't believe that's true. I think we're always changing. Like we are moving in a direction. Who I was a year ago is different than I am today. Who I am in a year from now is different than I am today. I get to choose in a lot of ways how I respond to things in the future. If I don't think about who I was a year ago and how I responded then and what went well and what didn't go well, I'm not learning anything. It's a willingness to be taught by my story. It's a willingness to be taught by other people's story and other people's story, other people's perspectives. So it does require a lot of courage to let somebody in close enough to share your story, to hear their different perspectives in order to just to like take that information in and decide on a path forward that you want to go, because like every guy decides the path they walk down. Like there's some things that they feel like, man, it's completely out of my control. Like that, I don't think that's true. It's just which pain we want to deal with from the decisions we make. Like somebody might feel like, man, I'm stuck in this refuge place. Like I'm stuck here. This is the only place I can be. That's not true. Like there's plenty of places like the refuge, but you chose to be here because this is a place that honestly, because we're people, so we're imperfect. This is an imperfect place, but it's really, really, really good at being a genuine community that cares about each other. And we're learning how to be better brothers, better members of this like common cause to improve each other. Like the guys that are sitting around you, the guys that I work with, they all want me to improve. That doesn't mean they think I'm a bad person. They're just like, I see potential in you. I see growth for you. Like that's good. That's pressure. That means like I can't just sit back and do nothing. Like I have to constantly be working on myself and what I'm doing. So that's a choice. I could, if I got tired of that, I could be like, man, I'm stuck here. I have to do this. Like, no, it's like, I get to do this. I get to put this effort in.
Yeah. This is leading me somewhere good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's painful, but it's not bad.
Right. Well, to land the plane, I think some people might be asking, like, what's the work we're talking about? And I mean, if you're at the refuge listening, I think it's showing up to group engaged. It's the effort it takes to listen. It's the effort it takes to ask questions, to think, to engage into group, to engage in your one-on-ones, to do the assignments, to write your life map, like to show up. Like it's amazing the groups I'll go to with individuals who have maybe been in the ministry for months. And sometimes I see guys that look like they're just, it's like it's cool to be passive and act like just the sense that you don't care, or like you look like you don't care. Like it's not cool. Like I remember like in high school, like, some kids thought it was really cool to like look like nothing matters, and it's like, no, I think a part of like taking yourself and your development seriously is to show up engaged, to show up awake, to show up, like asking good questions, listening. So writing about your life, like engaging with other people. And so if you're already doing that, you're well on your way. If you're not, why aren't you? What's going on? What's the story you're telling yourself? Are you telling yourself none of this matters? Are you telling yourself this is dumb? And if that's what you're telling yourself, then what is good? Then what are you doing? Why are you here? Like, show up. I mean, that's the first work that I think we're talking about. If you're not in the refuge, where do you want to change, and what might be a good first step for you? Are you doing anything to head in the right direction? Because chances are, if you're not talking to anybody about it, if you're not doing any personal writing about it, if you're not doing any personal reading about it, if you're not doing any reflection about it, most people, unfortunately, I wouldn't say most, a lot of people just complain about it. If you find yourself just complaining about it, you're going to have to do something. So I don't want to overwhelm anybody. Like, pick something to do. Pick something to do. Whatever that thing is that's making you feel stuck, pick something to do more than just complaining about it. Stop complaining and do something. Pick something. Maybe you're like, I'm struggling with X, Y, or Z. I'm going to read a book about it. I'm going to have a conversation. I'm going to meet with a counselor. I'm going to talk to my pastor. Take some sort of action towards it, because just complaining is such a toxic thing. I don't know what it is, but recently in my life, I've found myself in close proximity to a lot of people that it seems like all they do is complain about their problems, and shocker, it doesn't get better. And so I've been really hyper aware of myself doing this. And like, I don't want to be somebody who complains. I want to be somebody who moves towards the thing that I want. So it's like, if you're going to complain and not do anything about it, you might as well just shut up and just own it, because it's not going to change. Life doesn't typically, not everybody wins the lottery.
Oh man, that's too bad.
So if you live your life, yeah, if we live our lives like we're going to win the lottery, like, oh my gosh. And what I mean by that is, it's like, oh, one day everything's just going to happen the way I want it to. It's not going to happen. Sorry to burst your bubble. It's not going to happen. That's not how life works. The things that bother you, the things that you find yourself complaining about, ask yourself, what can I do? What's within my control that I can do to head in a better, different direction? And if you don't know the answer to that, talk with somebody. Talk with your small group. Talk with your pastor. Talk with a therapist. Talk to your best friend. Talk to somebody in your family that's not a complainer. Maybe you're surrounded by complainers. Maybe you're surrounded by people that aren't doing anything, and you're mimicking their behavior. So maybe you need new friends. Maybe you need a new community. But at the end of the day, we can change. It's hard work, but a good first step is to do something. Any last thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think that just like on the idea of complaining and what we mean by doing the work, it's like everybody complains. It's what we do with it. And there's complaints that come to mind all the time. It's what do I do about that? Because a complaint is just expressing dissatisfaction or annoyance about something. That in and of itself is fine. But if you just sit in it and don't do anything about it, the question you need to ask yourself when you find yourself complaining about something is, what do I want to do about it? Not what should other people do about it? Not what do I want God to do about it? I mean, we can always ask, pray, ask him for help. That's, helpful. But if I hear a complaint or I see something that I want to improve, what do I want to do about it? And if there's something I can do about it, do it. Do something small to improve whatever it is you're complaining. Because complaining about something is like, it's identifying what's important to you and how you want to make it better. That's half the solution. You just have to act on it. That's the difference between someone who's a chronic complainer and someone who's action oriented or growth focused. So it's not about it's like the idea of complaining is the first step. But if all we're doing is complaining and not doing any action, gosh, that's exhausting. So take action.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Relational Recovery Podcast. We'll be back soon with a new conversation. We'll see you then.